Brand Retro Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Brevick, and in every episode, our goal is to get you thinking differently about your marketing and your brand, and to help you avoid the trap of thinking small. The Brand Retro mindset is all about remembering those moments when you initially created and fell in love with your brand, all while applying these feelings and that authenticity back into the process of where you're at today. You don't have to be $1 million brand or spend $1 million to look like $1 million brand. Hey, good morning, Sima, and welcome to the Brand Retro Podcast. And thank you, first of all, for joining me. I know we've been kind of trading emails back and forth and trying to get this thing all figured out here for the past few weeks, but it's nice to finally have you on and talk some branding. So how are you today?
Yeah, no, the privilege is mine. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm doing well. I'm excited.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about what you do and a little bit about your background.
Sure. I'm a marketer at heart. I think it's at this point, it's in my genetics, but I see the world through a marketing lens. I spent 20 plus years in corporate marketing, B2B marketing, the slow, complex sale, mostly high tech. And today I teach people how to market themselves.
So tell me a little bit about kind of your thought process on the connection between the personal branding and the corporate branding. I personally, just to kind of set it up for you, over the years and over the course of my career, I've definitely identified that branding is everywhere. And I think sometimes we notice it, sometimes we don't. But once you're kind of aware of it and you start to kind of see opportunities, I think for branders, for marketers like us, it's hard not to see it and it's hard not to want to extract it, right?
I agree. Right. It's, I like to think of it as a rose-colored lens through which I see the world, but it can be sometimes a disease. Like, oh, you missed that opportunity to reinforce your brand. So many people talk about brands and the importance of brands. Business owners, we're working on our brand, and I find that often there's a misunderstanding, or at least an opportunity to better define what that even means. And at a bare minimum, if we think about brands as the promise, right, the promise that I'm going to get the product, you promise me this service, you promise me, old school marketing, we used to talk about first getting share of mind, and then as you get share of heart, you increase your share of wallet, right? That whole body brand experience. As a young marketer myself, working in the volatile high tech space, I discovered that it's not all that dissimilar with people. And, I was looking for work all the time. Dot-coms were exploding, mergers and acquisitions, and it was the Wild West here in the Chicagoland area. We called ourselves the Silicon Prairie. And I discovered that when I made small effort to raise my own visibility in the community of not just people who could hire me, but also people who could refer me, there was a ripple effect of sorts. My name, people came to me to inquire about what I could do for them, as opposed to me looking under couch cushions for job leads. And, that was about the time social media started to emerge. I was one of the first 100,000 people to join LinkedIn in this idea that we had a 24/7 digital billboard for ourselves. And then, flash forward to starting my own business some 13 years ago, and those same behaviors had me generating leads. So really had to step back and look at what is it about the personal brand that can lift up a business. And that's a lot of what I'm exploring with clients today.
Yeah, I think that, in my experience too, I feel like there was a time and a place, and it probably was pre-internet, pre-social media where they probably had more control. But I feel like we at some point kind of thought that the brand that we put out there was the package that we put together, and it's the package that we controlled, and that's what the customer sees, what we packaged. And that might have sort of been true prior to social media, prior to internet, but now that package it's too broad, it's too big, it's too open space, where everything you do on a daily basis is a contributing factor to the presentation and the perception of the brand.
Absolutely.
So when I work with clients, I talk about it all the time, that like what's your putting on social media, what you're wearing, how you interact with people. It's all recipe. It's all ingredients in that soup that you're making, which is your brand. It's not necessarily only the part you packaged up anymore, because there's too much connection, and it's too easy for people to connect the dots and figure out if you are your brand or if you're not.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a lot where social media started to become something B2B brands looked at. This idea that you cannot control the brand conversation, the consumer, the buyer, the thought leaders control that conversation, but you can take measures to influence it. So it's all those things. I like to say to an individual, every conversation you have is a marketing opportunity or a sales opportunity to further help somebody understand what you can do for not just them, but for the people they know. And this idea for the businesses you work with, that they can, if they're well understood, I might never become a buyer myself, but I'll make a recommendation just the same. And that idea of kind of owning the energy, the space, the conversation, or at least influencing it.
Yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on the deeper level of personal branding, because one of the things I work with my clients on, and I only mention it because I think it's fun to do. I think it's fun for them to kind of feel the extraction of their kind of it qualities. Where if I work with a client that's like, oh, I don't know what my brand is, or I don't know what my brand voice is, I don't know what the personality of my brand is. And I'm like, well, what do people say about you? Do they say you're funny? Do they say you're quick-witted? Do they say, like, what kind of things do they say about you? And let's steer into those complementary aspects of you, bringing them into the brand so that the connection between who you are as the creator and the founder now matches up and aligns with the brand itself. So regardless of whether they know you first or the brand first, over time it's going to click. They're going to be like, oh my god, this is one to one. This is a brand connection, that this is the guy behind the brand. And I think it's fascinating and somewhat interesting in working with clients that they're like, well, I don't really think about it like that. I don't really know that I want that as part of it. And I'm always of the mindset where I definitely think you wanted part of it, but I also somewhat think you don't have a choice, because if you are the brand, you are who you are, and you need to embrace that.
Right. And I think a lot of business owners early stage think, but I don't want this to just be me. I want to build the empire. And understanding that brands evolve over time is important to knowing that the decisions you're making right now don't necessarily have to shape and define the entire brand story and package for eternity. And as a former corporate marketer, I myself get caught in that thinking. Let's have it be perfect and flawless before we execute. And the truth is, early days with me, I had to realize that snarky or self, my humor, my shtick, if you will. I'm always kind of poking fun at myself. That's who shows up to shake your hand, to sign the contract, deliver the consulting, deliver the training, the keynote, and trying to be a different voice, either, in my real life or in my brand execution, was a bit maddening. And this idea that we can separate, I love when people tell me they won't connect with their best clients on Facebook, for example, because, oh gosh, forbid they see who they really are. Well, the truth is, people really like you, and you wake up likable and trustworthy and fun and sticky and sexy, right? That's what we want in a personality, and brands are embodiments of personalities, collectives. So I really think we all have to let go of perfection and the end game and really focus on who do your buyers want to give their money to
Well,
ultimately, right?
yeah, I think that's important, because I'm guilty of it myself. When I first started my business, I definitely was like, upfront with the fact that I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about the brand. I want it to almost be a faceless endeavor. And the more I went down that road, the more, whether it was compliments or just criticisms or whatever it was, the more people said, man, that is so you, or this is, I can tell that Cyberdogz because it's this, or they were always drawing the connection back to me. And at first, I very much resisted it. I'm like, I got to start over. This isn't working. I want it to be about the brand, not me. And then the further I went down that road, I'm like, well, maybe it's unavoidable that I am the brand, especially if I'm the guy driving it and I'm the guy steering it. And it can't not be about me. So maybe I need to embrace that. And I still I'm not a huge spotlight guy. That's not necessarily my purpose, but I've gotten over the fact that there is something about the guy who's creating it that needs to be present in this process. Cause like you said, that's the guy who's on the street every day. And that's the guy who's meeting with people that they're buying into. So it's a relationship of the personal brand and the business brand that they work together. And like you said, there's always a point in this process where the business brand can pull away and become more.
That's
It's
right.
just
It's 100% true. And listen, I'm an only child. I'm a keynote speaker. I'm not about shy and avoiding the spotlight. Like I will gladly take any spotlight you want to shine on me. That being said, I felt for a period of time that buyers, my corporate clients, didn't want to buy Sima. They wanted to buy the Sway Factory. And I actually went down the path of creating a web presence that was very um, polished and devoid of me. And it was a corporate feel, and it was a little bit more impersonal. And then it became really difficult to write my contracts and my proposals on this stale letterhead, because it was like a just emotional disconnect for me. I'm going to talk to you the way I'm going to talk to you. So for people who do what I do, I think there's this idea that we want to be grown up businesses, but at the end of the day, you're engaging with me or someone on my team who's been trained by me. So it's fun and fascinating. I always say to fellow marketers, it's really hard to cut your own hair.
right.
Really, really hard, which is why I appreciate conversations with like-minded professionals like you.
Yeah. So what's the advice you give to clients or people that are not quite there yet? They're still kind of stuck on the idea that, personal branding isn't for them, or it's not something they necessarily buy into.
Well, interestingly, today we have a lot more data around the efficacy, the efficiency of personal brands in action. There are emerging studies that point to the corporation's ability to fill the talent funnel faster when their staff look great online, when their staff have visible personal brands. Um, the sales, the connection to social selling, being known for something and attracting referrals, not because of the company you work for, because of the person you are and what you stand for, and how you've become a part of I call it your mental Rolodex. How do I think of you and know you as a subject matter expert beyond the company you work for? And one of the most interesting applications, I think, of personal brands is in talent retention. So a lot the old school companies used to think that we don't want our staff to shine too bright because they'll be poached, they'll be recruited away. Well, the truth is when they're ready to leave, they're leaving. In the interim, might you teach your high potential A performers, your emerging leaders to promote themselves within the organization, because when they get ahead faster, they're more likely to stay. So, this idea of personal brands unleashed, having the person enjoy their greatest fulfillment, but the business as well, that's an interesting intersection. And when I start to have those conversations, sometimes the small business owner, the sole proprietor, will see that starting on that page will be easier than trying to shift their thinking downstream.
Yeah. And I totally agree, but B, it's interesting because in some corporate environments I've even been in throughout my career, I've seen where if somebody has too much charisma or if they're too popular out of the gate, they would be suppressed in that we don't want that person to become too powerful or too well liked or too whatever. And it was really what they were fearing is that person might have more leverage.
Right.
And to me it was always like, well, why don't we throw gas on that? If so and so is super popular, super charismatic, or if they have a certain connection with a client or a vendor, we should be celebrating that to build a stronger relationship, because like you said, if that person chooses to leave, they're going to leave no matter what. It doesn't necessarily change the need or the relationship of the vendor to the business or whatever it is. I always kind of thought that was odd, and I never really thought about it from a personal branding perspective. But now that I run my own company, for me, I'm looking at people on my team and I'm like, how can I put them out front as often as humanly possible and even inject their personalities into my brand to hopefully attract more people like them or like myself to build a stronger team that is pushing the collective forward and make it less about one singular person or less about people that don't fit. We want to shine the light on those personalities, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's right. And when you have your top talent as a magnet for like-minded peers, bringing them into your talent pool, study after study shows that your best employees will help you recruit the next crop of best employees. And it's a really progressive headspace to own. And it can be fleeting because the fear of what if they leave and take my customers with them or my clients with them? Well, okay, what if? Right? What if you have a good product or service, you have to have ultimate faith in your ability to deliver business, to sell more business, to grow your business in the absence of a single person. And that's where we see smart companies begin to leverage influencer marketing strategies and give people within the organization and beyond free reign to shout your successes from the rooftops. It's an interest. It's still a bit Wild West, but I think the opportunity outshines the potential. Um, the potential downsides all day long.
You'd mentioned it earlier in that I think the idea of branding or even the term marketing, they went through a process of becoming kind of word of mouth and almost household to cliche. And now people are starting to break it down and dissect it as different parts. So I think, in my opinion, I think the idea of personal branding is starting to formulate for a lot of people because they're seeing the Gary V's, they're seeing whoever it is that are really doing a good job at it, and it's starting to click for them why a personal brand could potentially be the business vehicle that they need to push one singular storefront versus multiple, because a lot of entrepreneurs they have multiple things going on, and what's the
That's right.
center of that? The
Yeah.
center of that is their personal brand.
Yeah, and being able to tell your story without apologizing is something we weren't taught. There's a generation of people who weren't raised to even be mindful of that, of here's what I can do and what I bring to the table, what I'd like to be known for. And it's our job as individuals, whether we work for someone else or we own our business or we have a day job and a side hustle, whatever that is, to let people know how we, if I'm going to be honest, how we make the world a better place. Here's what I'm capable of doing. Here's when you should call me. Here's when you should knock on my door and say, I need help with, because that's my wheelhouse. I'm an expert in that. And when we really look at individuals as part of a collective, of part of a company, the idea that we're going to hide the individual players. I remember early days of my consulting business. I had a partner who did more public relations, and this idea that they had to take my email address and I had to hide the fact that they were not under my umbrella, so to speak. And you quickly realize that your buyers don't care. They want you to bring the A team. That's what they're relying on you for. So being able to bring the right people to the problem, to solve it is what I want to be known for, not for having all the people under my thumb. Right? It's really, you have to catch yourself. I know I have to catch myself with the idea of what's expected and versus what's possible today.
Yeah.
What's possible today? What different ways of working and storytelling can we lift up? If you go back all the way to days of Rotary clubs and chamber meetings, way back pre-social media, it was all word of mouth and let me introduce you to. And who do you know who can help me with? And today we amplify that by doing it in digital mediums.
Yep, it's fun. It's funny you say that because I'm working through it, but there's areas even of what Cyberdogz does that gets a little muddy because we do so much, and we do so much because it's based off of resources and referrals. So when somebody comes to us with a crazy idea and says, "Hey, do you know anybody that does this?" Chances are I'm going to go, "Yeah, I do actually. Let me make a few calls." And all of a sudden we're doing something crazy and one off that's not necessarily our purpose. It's not exactly what we do, but because we've built such a strong network and because we're so personable, we have those relationships. And I'm always kind of like you were alluding to is, yeah, let's help people out. Let's just do it. It doesn't always have to fit in the box.
Right, right, absolutely. And that's where you see brands evolve. Sometimes it's just the language we use to describe what we do. Influencer marketing versus word of mouth marketing versus social media marketing, early days, integrated marketing communications, or demand generation. Ultimately, are we skinning the same cat too many ways? That's an awful analogy. I should never use that again. But right, at what point are we helping somebody sell, right? Or are we storytelling? And it used to be that we worked really hard to get stories in newspapers, press relations, public relations, and that's becoming increasingly difficult. And even on social platforms, we find that we can't have organic stories go viral the way the media would have us believe. It's all about paid and boosting and all these other mechanisms. So when we think about the quickest path to telling a story, it's empowering our own teams and ourselves to tell that story in a way that is easily understood.
Yeah, I would even say, the whole idea of even going viral, it barely exists anymore because it's all leveraged or forced through some channel that like it's not
Right.
viral anymore because it's not organic.
Yeah, and the
Um,
viral news is often really sad right now. I don't
yeah.
want to,
Well, and I've even had clients, say or ask about, how do you go viral? How do you do X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, you can't force viral. Viral happens. And we recently had a client that had something go viral because it was reshared by one of the Kardashians. And my answer to them was, that's not really viral though, because it's not organic. It's somebody who has a massive following that has a
right.
massive influence that put their thumb on it or put their stamp on it. Therefore, it got more awareness, more engagement, whatever. Again, if the Kardashians want to retweet me, whatever, they certainly can.
Oh
But
yeah,
but
come
that's
on
not
down.
that's not necessarily viral. And I think it's helping customers and clients kind of understand how some of that works, helps them kind of understand what their position should be in the process of branding, personal branding, whatnot.
Yeah, and I know you work with your clients on this idea of voice and how do you want to sound and what will resonate. And again, hard to cut my own hair. Early days, early websites for me were asking for permission to know what I know. If I really looked at it, separated myself from the entity, because personal branding and social selling fell under the leadership bucket, and they weren't on they weren't on the line item of the budget. Like it wasn't like a CEO was calling me saying, I really need to drop a pile of cash on personal branding this year. So I really was always trying to make the case for it. Now it's gotten easier in recent years, it's better understood, but recognizing that I'm not somebody who asks permission, I'm somebody who you come to because you believe I know something that you should know, want to know, and I'm not going to coach it out of you. I'm going to tell you. That's clearly who I am. So I need to come out of the gate that way and be comfortable being me, as opposed to some posturing that has me feeling like fake or an imposter or false, or quite frankly, turning people away because at a subconscious level, they're expecting an expert. And I'm instead saying, well, if you're open to talking about it, I could perhaps show you, which is language that doesn't align with who I want to be on this earth, let alone, support a sales cycle. So we really do, I think, benefit from going through a process by which we look at our voice, what our buyers need, and then building the brand that connects those.
Yeah. And just to add on that, the one thing that I see with clients a lot, and I kind of have to explain to them, is I feel like I'm, if you want to say expert or whatever, I feel like I'm that, but I can only do what I do once you kind of give me what I have to work with. Like I got to know what ingredients I'm working with before I can make that amazing soup. Like I have to get that out of you. And part of that is a discovery process. Part of that's a discussion. But the number one thing I need from clients, and they have to deliver on, is they've got to be open to sharing who they are,
Yeah,
sharing
the
their vision.
discovery process is hard for clients and it's hard for consultants because you have to give them enough space to feel free, but enough pressure to not sit there in the unknowing. So it's this idea that, all right, you say you don't know, but if you did know, what would it sound like, smell like, feel like? And trust that over time, the evolution of your brand will follow the evolution of your business,
Right.
right? They work that way. Thinking through the end results is often limiting in the creative process, but an important aspect to also keep on the table. Like, where do you want to be in 10 years? But let's look at the next 18 because brands are so much more fluid than they used to be.
Right. I totally agree. So last question, as brands are repositioning, maybe they're dusting themselves off, whatever it is, from what was 2020 and coming into 2021, what's the number one piece of advice you're giving potential clients on, guys, here's how you should look at the next 10 months of the year, or here's the adjustments that you potentially want to make on your brand, for the long haul.
I believe brand consistency is something that's getting overlooked these days because there are so many more destinations where we execute brand messaging. So really doing a brand audit and looking at all the touch points from the physical collateral and the digital materials and the LinkedIn company page, which no one has looked at for 7 years, and all those outposts. Like you still have a Google Plus link on your website, and guess what? That doesn't exist anymore. And really controlling the places where the story shows up, and that manifests all the way down to when you onboard a new hire, what do they tell people that they do and for whom? And that's a verbal story, but also a digital one. Their individual social media posts and LinkedIn profiles. And we can't control that, but we can educate and influence those outcomes. So, I have a Google spreadsheet where I try to keep up with all the places Sima shows up. And when I have a new acronym or award or something I want to tell people I do this now, I need to go find all those places and update my story. And that's just, it's a perfunctory exercise, but at least quarterly we should be cleaning up our stories online. And so that's number one. And number two, I would say really looking at the way you articulate how you want to be known. So your name, your title, president, CEO, and founder is meaningless. Your company name often, as Cyberdogz, I don't know if you do digital dog training until I get to know a little bit more about you and who you are. So when we think about obfuscating our brand value, we can easily do that by hiding behind titles and vagaries when what people really want to know is, what do you do and for whom and to what end? And get rid of some of the noise and the puffery and speak a plainer English. We need more of that today than ever before.
I completely agree. And I would even say, to your comment on cleaning up the noise, as you're doing that audit and as you're looking at the landscape and your channels of marketing, get rid of the ones that are dead. Get rid of the ones that you're not spending time on. Get rid of the ones that are not performing. And
Amen. Get off of Twitter. You're not using it.
yes, focus on the stuff that's doing something for your business. And it doesn't mean you can't rethink it, come back to it, whatever, but you're wanting to clean up the footprint so when people actually go looking for you, they're not finding underperforming channels because it's a reflection on you and your brand.
I tell that to people all the time. I'm helping them optimize their LinkedIn profile, and they've got a link to their Twitter, which they set up, 7 years ago and never ever tweeted. And I said, you just wasted the viewer's time by taking me to a dead end. And I think to myself, what, you can't even clean up your digital detritus? And so much of a brand perception is that gut, visceral reaction that we don't even know we're judging you, right? Until we have this sum total idea. If you look like you can't get out of bed in the morning because of what I find about you online, well, that's a disconnect for me to get dressed in my car and go to your store and expect a different experience. So, yeah, I think they're more interwoven than we care to admit. I think business owners like to keep a lid on their personal lives, and they think personal life equals personal brand, and it doesn't have to. I don't need to know, your children's names and what you eat for breakfast or how slowly you run a 5K, but I do want to know who you are and what you stand for, what your passion and mission is, and what you feel your contribution is, because that will attract investors, buyers, employees, the media. It's attractive is all it is.
It's attractive, and I think it helps the audience, whether they're a consumer, a brand lover, whatever it is. It helps them understand, and it connects the dots, and it makes sense to them without them having to try to figure out how to make sense of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I shouldn't have to think that hard about who you are and what you do. If it feels right, it feels right, and it's a non-issue. It's when I see a disconnect or feel a disconnect. You see these people who they have profiles online like they were born the president of a 30-year-old company. I'm like, no, you weren't. You had 30 years of experience doing something somewhere. Why are you hiding it? Like, what's your story? That's, I think, what binds us as human beings together. And we all know it's people who buy from people that we know, like, and trust. So let's start living that story out loud.
I completely agree. Sima, thank you so much for being on. People can find more information about Sima at simadahl.com, correct?
Yes, yes.
And then obviously you're all over social media. Is there anything you want to leave us with? Or
Yeah, I'll leave you with this thought. When you wake up in the morning, you don't have to do anything to be interesting, to be fascinating, to be somebody worth knowing. All you need to do is let others in on what it is you do or aspire to do and how you serve. And that's your job. That's part of your job description these days. So when you look in the mirror, like, talk to yourself in a way that empowers you to talk to others in that way. And I think the story often starts within, and then it gets easier to tell to others.
Yeah. And not only is that true, but that should come naturally for everybody.
And if it doesn't, just work on it.
Right.
Because it didn't come easily for me in the beginning, but
it's
like
there,
to think,
right?
Yeah, I like to think I'm proof that you can learn to think and behave that way. We are all very capable of learning new skills, and this is, you can't teach an old dog new tricks to just play on the dog pun there, but you can. You can.
Yeah, you definitely can. All right, Sima, thank you so much for joining me, and I really
Thanks, Mike.
appreciate your time. And if you're open to it, we'd love to have you again.
Thank you.
Awesome. If you'd like to learn more about Cyberdogz, share your thoughts, or even ask a specific question about this episode and or the brand retro mindset, contact